Let's try it again now that I'm not on mute. Well, welcome everyone to the Gen Z GOP Town Hall, Municipal Republican Leadership on COVID-19. My name is Caitlin Reynolds, and I am joined by the Republican mayors, David Holt and Kevin J. Lincoln, as well as our fellow GOP constituents, Elle Kalish and Adrian Livingston. Hello, gentlemen. How are you guys doing tonight?
Great. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much. Let me begin by thanking everyone for coming out tonight, especially you, the audience members, for participating in this programming we have. We at Gen Z GOP are very eager to have you with us. To learn more about our organization, you can go to genzgop.org and learn more about our founding, our mission, our policies, leadership, and so much more. Now, without further ado, let's begin by further introducing our guests and moderators. Hailing from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, we have Mayor David Holt. Mayor Holt was installed into office on April 10th, 2018 as the city's 36th mayor. Mayor Holt has also broken numerous records by being the community's youngest mayor since 1923, the United States' youngest mayor with more than 500,000 residents, and the first Native American mayor in the history of Oklahoma City. Additionally, with 78.5% of the vote, Mayor Holt received the largest vote percentage achieved by a non-incumbent candidate for mayor since 1947. This father of two and life partner to wife Rachel, the current executive director of the Oklahoma Office of Juvenile Affairs, continues to act on his firm belief that, quote, Oklahoma City will thrive only if its residents set aside the things that divide us and find common purpose. Again, please welcome Mr. Mayor David Holt.
Thank you.
And yes, accept your silent applause from our virtual audience.
I'm sure people are roaring in homes all across the country.
Oh, of course. Standing ovations, really. And now joining us from Stockton, California, we have Mayor Kevin J. Lincoln. Newly elected to office in November 2020, Mayor Lincoln won the support of the Stockton residents over incumbent leader Mayor Michael Tubbs. As a Stockton native, Mayor Lincoln was raised in an Army family. It was inspired to serve others through community outreach programs and advocacy for juveniles within the criminal justice system. This selfless persona led Mayor Lincoln to join the United States Marine Corps, where he was later recruited by the White House Military Office and assigned to Marine One under the administration of President George W. Bush. Following his service in the military, Mayor Lincoln worked for one of the nation's top private security companies in Silicon Valley, but eventually resigned this corporate position to pursue Christian ministry, and then to this current position as the town's mayor, uplifting his hometown with the support of his spouse of 18 years, Bonnie, and their two wonderful children. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Mayor Kevin J. Lincoln.
Thank you.
All right, and now for our moderators. We have joining us tonight the Gen Z GOP Vice President of Communications and Spokeswoman. She originates from the scenic side of Antioch, Illinois, at the Illinois-Wisconsin border, and is currently a senior at American University School of International Service in Washington, D.C., where she is specializing in global health and data science. Please welcome Vice President Gabrielle L. Kalish. Tonight, we also have Gen Z GOP's Vice President of Legislative Affairs. She's a recent graduate of Liberty University who earned the distinction of summa cum laude with a degree in government politics and policy and a minor in history. Joining us all the way from the Twin City of North Carolina, please welcome Vice President Adrian Livingston. And finally, I'm your third moderator. My name is Caitlin Reynolds. I am the Vice President of Operations for Gen Z GOP, sending you warm greetings from the greater St. Louis area and also from the Georgetown University community. Now, We have, thank you. We have a lot in store for you guys tonight. So we're going to kick off this evening with some questions for our mayors about the manner in which they have handled their local affairs as it relates to the novel coronavirus. Our discussion will range from topics such as prevention and mask mandates to the recent COVID-19 vaccinations. At the end of tonight's event, we will invite the audience to ask questions of the mayors and vocalize their thoughts. But before we begin, we just want to make sure, do we have any questions from our guests tonight?
I do not. Just thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. Very welcome. All right. And without further ado, I will pass this on to Vice President Livingston.
Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. Adrian, before we get to you, I just want to remember everyone on our social medias that you can tweet us questions for these two awesome mayors that we have here using the hashtag GenZGOP Town Hall. You can tweet that on Twitter, or you can just submit them in your comment section on whatever social media that you are currently streaming with us. And without further ado, I'm going to turn that over to Adrian.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight. As they said, I am the Vice President of Legislative Affairs, Adrian Livingston, and I will be your moderator tonight that will be asking you these questions. So, first off, I would like to ask, how has COVID-19 directly affected your citizens, and what were your first thoughts and priorities at the start of this? And either of you can go first.
Well, I would say
Maybe
that. Oh,
Go ahead, No, you first.
Okay. So I'll say, well, when COVID first hit, I was in the middle of a campaign, and it was actually just got through the primary election on March 3rd, and then in California, COVID hit mid-March. So essentially, it was a huge shock. Everything shut down from a campaign standpoint for the next 3 months, and then we figured it was time to kick things back into gear in July. And it was just a sprint from that point forward. But, the need was great throughout the community. And I was glad that I was on the other side in the initial onset of the pandemic as a resident, and even as a candidate, it afforded me the opportunity to really engage the community and understand the needs in Stockton. So particularly, there's a lot of poverty in Stockton, and there's a lot of food insecurities here. And so I was able to really develop relationships with a lot of local nonprofits and community stakeholders to help meet the needs, not only from food resource standpoint, but even as we began to roll out the PPEs and things like that to make sure everybody was safe. And so I just really saw the community come together, as a whole on that side. And when funding was released, just to see that allocation of funding go to work in real time was something that I really appreciated coming in as mayor. Realize, I have a deeper look at how the pandemic has impacted our city. With the city of a little over 318,000 people, we've had about 28,000 cases as a whole, 490 deaths locally, but we're looking at a 92% recovery rate. And so there's still about a couple thousand people out there right now that are still infected. But there's been a huge impact on many different levels, even small business impact and even the residents as a whole. So that's just what I wanted to share.
Yeah, and I would say I became mayor in 2018. So I'd been in office right about 2 years when the pandemic arrived in Oklahoma City. We had the benefit of seeing what had already occurred in the coastal areas and in Italy and other places, and could see the seriousness of the situation. You measure first your first options that you look at are, well, what if we did nothing? Well, nothing is probably what New York and Italy were experiencing because it caught them sort of by surprise. And even today you can see in the statistics. I mean, New York City suffered, I forget now, but over 200 or 300 deaths per 100,000 residents, whereas we sit now today at about 72 in Oklahoma City. Well, that's an example, of contrasting with what we were able to do because we had knowledge and what they weren't able to do because they didn't. And so because we had knowledge, we acted pretty quickly. When we had our first case in Oklahoma City was on March 15th. I declared an emergency in our city that night. And on March 17th, which was St. Patrick's Day, I began to take some of the actions that same week were being advised by the White House, including closing the bars. I literally closed the bars at 5 o'clock on St. Patrick's Day. I'm sure that, I mean, the historical happenstance of that is pretty remarkable, and I certainly don't look forward to ever having to do that again. I think that's also a good illustration of, I mean, Mike Tyson always said everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, Well, everybody has an ideology until you're in a crisis. And I mean, yeah, though I come, to this position with a limited government philosophy, look, it's a pandemic, I mean, whether, all of that kind of goes out the window, and you got to be pragmatic, and you got to do what's right to prioritize health. And in that particular moment, we really didn't know what we were dealing with, and we were seeing, catastrophic losses in other places. So we acted. Now, I think we found a good balance over the course of the next months that followed in trying to thread the needle between health and economy and all of those things. And ultimately, we as a community kind of opened up in mid-May. Everything at that point was fully open. There were some lingering limitations after that. And then in July, we had never had a state mask requirement. So in July, our community adopted that through an ordinance, which I was supportive of. And I look at that as very similar to, the fact that we've always required food preparation employees to wear hairnets or, or speed limits or whatever it is to protect public health and safety. The usage and somewhat obvious to me, but so that ultimately mask wearing is kind of what we coalesced around. We really haven't had any major restrictions since May of 2020, and that seems to have helped. As I said earlier, we have a fairly low rate of death here in Oklahoma City, 72 deaths per 100,000 residents. There's only 6 cities over 500,000 out of the 37 or so cities that are over 500,000 that have a lower rate of death than we do. And that's ultimately a pretty important measurement to me, is how many people have you lost? We've lost 895 in our metropolitan area over the course of this pandemic, which is, a tremendous loss of life. But again, could be much worse if we were anywhere near the state average or the national average or the average in other places like New York City or Los Angeles. So I'm pretty proud of it, but it's still a horrific time in our lives on so many levels. And obviously there's the secondary fallout of the economy. And we've tried to balance and be pragmatic on that as well. And we were one of the cities that got direct funding through the CARES Act. So we put a lot of that into small business support, basically direct grants to small businesses. We're also able to utilize other things like PPP, but we had some local funding through the CARES Act that we were able to utilize as well. So we've tried to muddle through as best we can, and I'm very open to being pragmatic in times like this. I mean, I err on the side of a limited government whenever I can, but I also recognize that there are moments why government exists. I'm a nonpartisan official in Oklahoma City, but it's not a secret that I entered this office as a Republican. I served as a Republican in the Oklahoma State Senate for 8 years. And to me, a Republican is not an anarchist. A there's a different party for that. That's the Libertarian Party. We believe in government, and there are times when government is the expression of our community's ability to rally together and do what's got to be done. And this was a weird time. And this doesn't mean that this is the way that government should operate at other times, at more normalized times, but it is perhaps the way that government has to operate in times of great crisis, And so if every 100 years or so, we have to do things that maybe are outside of our comfort zone in a pandemic, I'm accepting of that. And that's the role I was willing to play. And I find that really all mayors around the country who were put in those positions, whether they were Republican or Democrat or independent, all kind of took the same course of action because it was the right course of action. Some may have gone farther than others, and those are places where we can have debates. But I think Oklahoma City found the right balance.
Well, thank you both so much for your answers. And I want to piggyback off of what you mentioned. which is the government ideology that has a lot to play in COVID. So back to Mayor Lincoln, and then back to you, Mayor Holt. How have you dealt with the personal freedom versus public health debate among your constituents?
Yeah, I think what we have to remember that is this pandemic that we find ourselves in, it's not a red or blue situation, a crisis. It's a red, white, and blue crisis. And so, it's important to take that approach to it. There's times where we're going to have to make, tough decisions. As Mayor Holt was talking about, we're going to have to take a pragmatic approach. There's nothing more important to us as elected officials is the health, safety, and well-being of our constituents. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to get it right either, and that's what happens in leadership from time to time. But we can't be afraid to make those decisions. And everybody may not agree, but I think what we can agree on, as long as the communication channels are open, is that we're making the best possible decision in this moment, given the circumstances, that's in the best interest of our community right now, and for the foreseeable future. So I believe public health is everybody's responsibility. I think one of the things that we should do when it comes to the personal freedom versus public health debate is to really take, a balanced approach, and take an evidence-based approach, and take an educational approach to how we're communicating, with the public in terms of, with some of the guidelines, and some of the things that we're rolling out to our community. But from a personal freedom and a public health debate standpoint, for me, it's absolutely important to protect and maintain public trust throughout that process as well.
Yeah, I think it was really on point what the mayor said about using data and science and have support, have arguments for what you're doing. I mean, we really tried to focus early on when we were more in the realm of putting restrictions on gatherings, that whether it be a party, a restaurant, a concert, a hair salon, that we were basing it on something that was logical and science-based. And then as time went on, as we had more data to work from, that we then transitioned as well to including data in that analysis. For example, I think hair salons are a good thing, a good example of that. That seemed to make a lot of sense. It was logical at the very beginning. Well, that's a encounter that is impossible to execute without being too close to someone. So that was a gathering that caused a lot of concern. So we, like everybody else, basically banned haircuts for about a month. My hair got pretty shaggy in that time period, as did a lot of people's. And then once we kind of loosened those reins, and here in Oklahoma City, that was about around May 1st, I believe, when hair salons were allowed to reopen. Then we checked, we kept checking back. Is anybody getting COVID-19 at hair salons? And the answer really consistently ever since has been no. So we really haven't talked about hair salons anymore. So we went from a logical argument, which I would argue, to a data-based argument, and our actions evolved as a result, because we just didn't see that happening. People wore masks, whatever the case. They were careful, and they were not transmitting it at hair salons. The other thing, though, that I think, the whole different argument, though, about masking, which is kind of separate sort of from all of that, I've never really had much sympathy for, against it anyways. I mean, it to me, a virus that is spread by essentially people spitting on each other. And I've tried to be very graphic about describing it throughout this pandemic so people can really understand. It's not some magical force that surrounds you when you have COVID-19. It's your saliva drops. And I love videos that I've seen. I try to share them whenever I can, where people have been creative with cameras to show the saliva that we project onto each other. It's just as disgusting as it sounds, but we've been doing it for centuries, and it's usually fairly harmless, except at times like this. And so, if that's how it's being spread, whereby people essentially projecting their saliva on each other, I don't need a bunch of studies really to tell me that a little cloth mask would help with that. It's not a It's obviously not going to protect you to a degree of 100%. It's more about protecting others, and it does do that to some extent. And it's not a big cost, there's virtually no cost in acquiring the material, and there is no real cost to your freedom, in my view, any more than the expectation that I wore a shirt to this interview and the expectation that I wear pants when I leave the house. I mean, all of these things are part of our civilization. And to me, this became a new and reasonable expectation in the midst of the pandemic. I think that the fact that became an issue of freedom was just crazy, ludicrous, and I don't think was Republican or anything. I think it was kind of nonsense. And so we've been big advocates here in Oklahoma City, and it's had broad public support, and we needed supermajorities on the council to accomplish it because of the need for emergencies and all that. And we have obtained those, even in a community that's maybe traditionally viewed as conservative and right of center. So I think leadership matters on issues like that, and leadership in the right times and in the right places projected what I viewed to be a common sense view on that. And obviously we don't want to do it any longer than we have to. And so we continue to reevaluate it. We do extensions here in Oklahoma City. It's not a permanent ordinance. And as community transmission diminishes and vaccinations increase, then I expect we'll drop the legal requirement to wear a mask, and as it should be. But that was one issue I've tried. I always try to sit in the shoes of others and try to see the way they see it, but I've never been able to see that particular issue the way they see it. But I definitely can see both sides of closing things and restricting business activities, and that's why we've tried to be very judicious with that.
Well, thank you both for being such strong leaders in such a uncertain time. Your response definitely shows that you put your constituents first. And kind of piggybacking off of that again, since you both have taken the virus so seriously and have done a lot to combat the effects as much as possible, how have you dealt with the narrative that Republicans don't take it seriously?
You want me to go first, Mayor Lincoln?
Sure.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to be provocative, but I mean, that is, I don't try to defend some of the things that happened at the federal level during this pandemic. I don't feel that that's my obligation. I was highly disappointed in a lot of the things that were said. It's really important. I think we already inherently knew this, but I certainly learned the lesson even more so in this pandemic, that leading by example, modeling good behavior is really, really important, maybe more important in a pandemic than the proclamations you issue and the policies you pass. And we lacked that at the highest levels of government by people who were Republicans. And I'm country first, party somewhere 10th on the list. I mean, I really don't care to try and protect people or defend people who did a bad job. And I think a lot of people at the federal level did a really bad job in modeling the right behavior that was really needed in a time like this. And they paid a price. They're not in office anymore. So, but I think there's been lots of leaders, Republicans and Democrats around the country who have handled it far better and have saved a lot of lives as a result.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Mayor Holt said, I actually want to key in on that leading by example. That was absolutely critical, because here in Stockton, right? I mean, the mayor's seat is a nonpartisan seat as well, right? And so, for me, being on both sides during the pandemic, it's been that leading by example. So for me, as a candidate, I knew that I was in a interview of a lifetime, for lack of better terms. The public were ultimately deciding who they were going to hire, to lead them moving forward in the midst of a pandemic. And so there's a clear contrast between myself, a Republican, and the incumbent mayor, a Democrat, where I was actually more engaged and out in the public and leading by example, in the community. And I never talked about party. right? I was an example. And so, in a city where, Democrats, outpace Republicans 2-1, it didn't matter. Like I said earlier, this is not a red or blue crisis. This is a red, white, and blue crisis. And so people just want to know, are you going to, when stuff hits the fan, are you going to be present? Are you going to take a leadership role are your actions going to back up, the words that come out of your mouth? And for me, I always wanted, from a leadership standpoint, my actions, to precede me, my reputation to precede me in whatever I'm doing. I want you to see before I even speak, right? And so this is how we approach the pandemic as well. So people knew, yeah, at least in Stockton, that I took the pandemic seriously. And so when my opponent would try to utilize what was happening at the national scale and apply that to me, it didn't translate because the people saw me, they felt me, they heard me out in the community, and they knew that I was championing those things that was in the best interest of public health and public safety. And so, locally here in Stockton, I really didn't see that as much as an issue.
Well, thank you both for your common sense leadership and your humbleness, and just for being amazing leaders that we desperately need right now in the GOP. And thank you both for taking the time to come here and discuss these important issues. And we'll move on to Elle.
Thank you, Adrian.
Everyone. Well, thank you for those thoughtful and critical answers. You can definitely tell from our audience response that is well received. So from behalf of the team here at Gen Z GOP and everyone across the country, I want to thank you for your leadership. And so with that, we're going to kind of transition into some of our audience questions. And the first question is actually going to be for Mayor Lincoln. Mayor Lincoln, I'm going to put this comment also on the screen, but then I'll also read it out loud for you. So it says, how would you say that your local response to the coronavirus pandemic differs from Governor Newsom's?
Well, I'm new in the seat as mayor, so I think we're just hitting 6 months and or 6 weeks. 6 weeks, it feels like 6 months. But I would say, one of the things that have really been a concern for us here locally is the lack of transparency, when it comes to the rolling out of certain guidelines, at the state level. And, it feels like the goalpost is constantly being moved on us here in the state of California. And the residents and the small business owners are the ones that are kind of suffering the most. I love Mayor Holt's common sense, data-driven approach, in his city and in the state of Oklahoma when it comes to, the barbering and cosmetology industry, right? And how, you guys had the facts and you ended up, making the adjustments along the way. Well, the same thing is true here in California, where the outbreaks within that industry were far few in between. That's one of the industries that has some of the most strict hygiene requirements, right? And so, so when that information came out, the adjustments weren't made when it comes to, the guidelines, right? And so everybody was just kind of put in this pot. And so I think, that's a huge opportunity, for us moving forward, is to make sure that, we say we're taking a data-driven approach to things, but make sure we're being transparent with the public with the data. And listen, if you don't have, as a leader, personally, if I don't have the data, I'll tell you I don't have the data. And that's a part of building that trust as well. So, again, like I said earlier, protecting, maintaining public trust through this process, is absolutely important, and leading by example. And so from a leadership standpoint, when your governor is getting caught, in settings where he necessarily shouldn't be, during times of pandemic and not following through with the guidelines, that doesn't help, with the public trust, right? And so for me, even though I can go to my church right now, on the weekend, I don't go to my church on the weekend because it's just the right thing to do given the circumstances as a leader, right? And setting that example. And so, for me, I think, something different just fundamentally is just, making sure that you're being absolutely intentional about leading by example. And of course, you're going to make mistakes from time to time. You're not always going to get it right. Nobody's perfect, but own it, own it and move forward.
Well, absolutely. I mean, as young people, we definitely understand what it's like to make mistakes and try and learn from them. So that is really a great lesson to kind of, take with us moving forward past this pandemic. So Mayor Holt, something in the kind of the same line here as a question that we kind of saw coming from our Twitter is, how did your response differ from that of your governor? And how did you go along with those differences when you did have those differences more from a state, federal, and then to your local level?
Mm-hmm. Well, we were aligned on many things, and I think where there was tensions, it probably actually created a pretty healthy tension. I mean, I think it was a good testament to, the state and local laboratories for democracy that we have in our country. As we went one direction and maybe they went a slightly different direction, the outcome that ultimately ensued was probably properly somewhere in between, and that was good. I mean, I just think when I look back on the push and pull between our city and our state, and I look at the final result, I mean, it's not over yet, but I look at the data I was talking about earlier about the low incidence of death here in Oklahoma City compared to other places. I think, and our unemployment rate and all of that, I kind of think, I think we found the right balance, but I don't know if we did it all by ourselves or whether it was a product of that tension between the state and local, and that was actually good. The most notable difference that anybody in Oklahoma would point out would be masking. However, there has never been a statewide requirement for masking here in Oklahoma, and we adopted ours in July. We were a little later as far as big cities go because many of those cities were in states that had already instituted a requirement, so they didn't have to go through the exercise that we did of having to pass an ordinance and all that. They just did it with the signature of a governor. But I just say that's just an issue where I fundamentally I'm on a different wavelength than state leadership, and I guess probably articulated that already this evening. But
well, yeah, I mean, that is entirely understandable. So we have a question from the audience specifically for you, and they want to know, as a big Thunder fan, when can we expect folks back at some Thunder games again?
That's really up to the Thunder. I mean, again, and we're fairly, reasonable on these things. And if the Thunder wanted to have some fans, that there's no legal restrictions on that. We expect and understand that they would do so in a limited fashion, have some sort of, quarter capacity or something like that. But they wanted to be very cautious. And of course, when the season started, only maybe 2 or 3 out of the 30 teams had fans at all. So it's understandable that they did not have them. And now a few more have stepped up, and I expect they will follow at some point. It was hard to do that when our numbers were so incredibly high as they were just a month ago. But now that they're kind of coming down, everything's down about 50% over the last month. It feels a little different. And I wouldn't be surprised if that comes soon. I mean, they're going to need a little lead time once they make an announcement. But I expect here in the spring that we'll have some Thunder fans again.
Well, that is great news. I think, as we all know, sports have definitely been a safe haven for us during this pandemic. So, Mayor Lincoln, I actually have a question for you coming from one of your constituents, and I'm going to read it to you. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce her last name as I don't want to butcher it, but her name is AJ, and she says that she grew up in Stockton and lived on 8th Street. She went to St. Mary's every day and would drive through the South Side and see the homeless population. What do you plan to do to provide opportunities to the homeless and prevent this from happening in the future? She also says, my parents back home, both with pre-existing conditions, said that the vaccine rollouts have been slow. How do you plan to make this more efficient, especially in these low-income areas?
Absolutely. Yeah. So homelessness is, outside of the pandemic right now, it's the number one issue here, in Stockton, California, and majority of the West Coast. In fact, sweeping nation right now. And so there's several things that we're doing locally here in Stockton to make sure that, we're providing the right services for our homeless population. But, we're doing the best we can, and focusing on initiatives that are going to take the next step, help them take the next step towards healing in their life. And so one of the things that through the pandemic and through some of the COVID relief that we've received, we've been able to help support some of our local community partners, shelters with expansion as well, and creating a navigation center for our homeless community where they come in. Essentially, the navigation center will serve as a emergency center for emergency room for a hospital. They'll come in, they'll triage, and we'll understand what their needs, because in Stockton, 60% of our homeless are dealing with either substance abuse and or mental health issues. And so we want to help them navigate through that. And so the Navigation Center not only helps us provide the right services and put them on that pathway, but also will help them take the next steps towards independence as well, and maybe getting reacclimated with the community, workforce development type training programs and things like that. But another piece is that we have to focus on as well, and that we are focusing on, is capacity, increase the amount of capacity for temporary emergency housing and more longer term affordable housing here in Stockton. So those are some of the areas that we're focusing on and that have been a huge priority. But it's going to take a partnership between the city of Stockton and the county and the private and public or the private and nonprofit sector within the city. This is no matter what socioeconomic status that you're on here, you find yourself in here in Stockton. There's one thing about Stocktonians, and they love to give back, and they're very passionate about their community. And there's a lot of deep roots here, and we want to see our city win. And one of these areas is when we begin to provide the right services for our homeless. That's a part of winning in our city. And I'll tell you, there's been a lot of organizations that have been doing a lot of great work in our community to meet this need. But what I found over the past year is that there's a lot of organizations that are running parallel with one another. And what I mean by that is they're essentially doing the same thing and they don't even know it. So I see this huge opportunity to really pursue collaboration, out within Stockton, these different agencies, and really, align resources so that we could be that much more effective and that much more efficient in the process.
Yeah, well, thank you for that thoughtful answer. I also want to say that it's really great to hear a municipal leader talk about homelessness. That's an issue that we see across the country, and we don't really get to hear from leadership very often. And so it's really great to see you so eloquently speak on that topic. Our next question is actually coming from Sam Aboto, who is currently one of our Gen Z GOP managers. And he asks, what can we learn from the way we've handled this pandemic so that we're better prepared for next time?
Well, goodness, I hope we don't have a next time in my lifetime. Right?
Well, maybe in ours. I'm going to be taking notes here.
Hey, we're not, Mayor Lincoln and I aren't that old. We're not that old. Well, look, we at the beginning of this pandemic mitigated it the exact same way that people did in 1600 in London. I mean, it doesn't change. When you don't have a treatment or a vaccine, all you got to do is keep away from each other and wear masks. I mean, that's all you can really do until you get your arms around it and hopefully you have some sort of medical solution. So the lessons we learned here are ancient ones. And I guess we learned that we still struggle to apply them. And so, as I said earlier, I mean, I would certainly hope that if we have to experience this again, that we'll have good modeling from our national leadership and good leading by example, and that we'll do the obvious things that we need to do to mitigate the spread of the virus as we try to figure out how we can medically address it. So that's a major aspect of it. Of a lesson learned is just apply the lessons we already learned, I think is what we should do. It didn't have to be this way. When you look at maps of the world and the effect that COVID-19 has had globally, it should make you embarrassed to see the disproportionate effect that America has experienced. And it didn't have to be this way. So I do hope we'll, as a country, learn some important lessons from this, but I don't know that they were groundbreaking lessons. They were lessons that we have applied as a people many, many times before. It's just that, it only comes around every 100 years, hopefully. And we have to relearn them. So we'll see. We'll see what the future holds, I guess.
Absolutely. Mayor Lincoln, do you have any additional thoughts?
Sure. Without a doubt, once we get through the pandemic, we're going to have a rather extensive after action, report that's written. And, but I think we also one thing we realize is the power of public-private nonprofit partnerships, and just how important it is sometimes to cut through, and how that can help us cut through some of the red tape and the bureaucracy to actually, get things done, and get to that desired outcome, or get on the pathway to that desired outcome sooner rather than later. I think one of the takeaways as I'm just assessing and observing how things are playing out right now is that, we all, and this goes back to that desired outcome, right? Say vaccines, we need the vaccines. We got to push through, we got to get it done. We got to make them available. But then, that's the desired outcome. But then what's the process of distributing those vaccines when you get them, right? And I think oftentimes we can focus so much on the desired outcome and less on the process or the system that's going to help us be much more effective, when that time comes. And so if there's something that I think we could learn from this is as we are cutting through the red tape and the bureaucracy, that we make sure we spend just as much time and energy focusing on the process. That way, when we get those vaccines, it's not a logjam, right? And then also, what do we learn from this pandemic? And look at the types of crisis that can happen within your region. In Stockton, we could experience a flood here. We have the Delta Channel that runs through from the Bay Area, and there's levees all over the place, and our infrastructure. So we have to take a proactive approach as well. Work with our Office of Emergency Services and just make sure that we're ready, prepared for the best we possibly can for the next thing that may happen, crisis that may happen in our communities.
Yeah, well, that is absolutely great advice. And so I guess going off that same term in terms of a federal response, and we were talking about vaccine rollout, there's a lot of conversation right now surrounding the next COVID-19 relief package and what we can do. And so let's talk about that from a moment on a municipal perspective. What are your views on this debate surrounding the new federal stimulus package and direct payments, especially for folks like in your towns?
Well, we're supportive I'm supportive of direct allocations here. I think the most recent one that we received was from the Treasury Department for rental relief. And so we were able to move $27.1 million out with that first relief package.
That's incredible.
To the community. And, that's a huge, I give credit to our city staff, our city manager, who really put in the time and the effort, and our council that was ready to make some swift and decisive decisions, and getting that funding out to the public. And then, we have another wave out. So we recently have the relief for residents with direct allocation. But we also, from the state, we have another $10 million coming in direct allocation that will also be able to help landlords as well. And so we're just going to take, the model that we used in the first wave for our residents, and getting them that relief and apply that, for our landlords as well. And so, we're 100% support in direct allocation, and I have full confidence in our staff's ability to get it done because they set that precedent as well. And listen, I was on the other side when the first relief package came out. So out in the community, I saw real time, that funding, hitting the streets of our city. And I saw real time our community coming together, right, and sharing the resources that were allocated. Then we had nonprofits helping other nonprofits, and it was just, it was beautiful. So not only do I have confidence in our city to get the funding out there, but also confidence in our community to come together to meet the needs of one another.
Yeah, I'd add, as mayors, we're one issue voters on things in front of Congress. So if it's good for cities, we're for it. And if it's not good for cities, we're either neutral or opposed. And so, of course, I'm supportive of aid to cities as has been proposed in this most recent pandemic package. I'm not in Congress. If a House member or a senator feels like they have other balancing interests that they're going to prioritize higher than that, like the national debt or something, that's fine. But I never feel like I feel like it's not only not my job to worry about that, really. I mean, it's kind of almost an abdication of my duty to worry about that. That's for them to worry about. I have to worry about Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma City's had a shortfall in revenues. We've had to cut city services. Every other employer in the country has largely been eligible to apply for support with their revenue problems through PPP and other programs, but we haven't. No city or state has received support for its revenue shortfalls. We received direct funding from the CARES Act back in the spring, but that was the one thing we couldn't spend it on. Was we were barred by the act from spending it on our revenue shortfalls. So we've got 4,800 employees. We have payroll to meet, and so we welcome that support. I understand, the way it's shaping up in Washington, it may ultimately pass without Republican votes or without any significant number of Republican votes, and that's no doubt for some partisan reasons, maybe for some principled reasons. But again, as mayor, I feel like it's my obligation to the people of Oklahoma City to mostly just have one principle, and that's what's good for Oklahoma City. So what was released this week would send $116 million to Oklahoma City, according to the information they shared, and we would make good use of that, and so we would welcome that.
Awesome. So obviously, as Gen Z GOP, our overall goal is to increase young leadership within the Republican Party. So one of our viewers asks, how do you think we can bring young people to the Republican Party when, especially in the pandemic, we are painted as people who are anti-science?
How much time do we have?
I wish we had a lot more, trust me.
Look, I mean, this is the question of our era for this party. Look, the country needs at least two political parties. And for a political party, any organization to survive, it has to continue to have an infusion of young people, obviously. Otherwise, it dies, literally. And I think this is a relatively friendly audience to what I'm going to say, but whether it is or it isn't, it's the truth. We are a month away from the official leader of this political party inciting a mob to attack the U.S. Capitol. And until we have reckoned with that, and really, I believe, purged that kind of madness from this political party, it's going to struggle to attract young people, educated people, people of color, not just because of what happened on January 6th, but of so many things that are a part of that led to that. And so, we're talking tonight, and it's surprising it would take 52 minutes to get to this, because it is, pun intended, the elephant in the room. This is a very, very challenging time for this political party. And there are some core principles that it has traditionally stood for that cannot be abandoned. I mean, this country needs a party that stands for the free market and limited government and competent government and a strong national defense. But those things have been sidelined in the last 4 years by conspiracy theories and racism and misogyny and things that I sure as hell didn't sign up for 20 years ago when I became a Republican. And so I'm glad to be a nonpartisan official. I feel like my political party is Oklahoma Cityan and Oklahoman and American. And if I'm forced to identify one, obviously I am on paper a Republican, but I'm a Republican from what Republicans were 5 years ago. And that is worth fighting for and trying to restore. because, as I said, this country needs two political parties, and it needs a party that stands for all those values I just articulated. And we shall see how that plays out. And I recognize all the challenges that we face in trying to reestablish that. But there has to be a home for that, either here or somewhere else. And I think that will be the challenge of this Generation Z, to try and reestablish that either here or in some new form.
Mayor Lincoln, any thoughts?
Sure. I would say that it's got to start locally. It has to start local. It has to start in our cities. It has to start, in our education system. We have to do a better job of reaching and bridging that gap with the younger generation, and meeting them on their platforms, right? And engaging them and giving them opportunities. We also have to we have to do more focusing on local issues as well. We can win on the local issues if we make that a priority. And if we take a humanitarian approach to public service. And I mentioned just a moment ago about creating opportunities for Gen Z and the younger generation. Listen, my policy advisor is a junior at Stanford. He's turning 21 on Monday. Right.
That is incredible to hear, by the way. Thank you so much.
Yeah. For me coming into office, I recognize that. And it's about that, and it's twofold. One is I realize, the capacity that this young man has, and what the gifts that he's been blessed with. And COVID kind of was a blessing for him because he has to do remote learning right now, which created this opportunity for him to join my administration. But for me, it was equally as important to provide that opportunity because he could be an inspiration to his generation, right? And I have a responsibility, as an elected official, as the mayor of Stockton, to create those opportunities, for our young people, not only at the collegiate level, but high school, and figure out ways to get at the elementary level, right? We're teaching leadership in our schools right now. So why not create opportunities for them to become more civically engaged along the way? And so that's just, for me, those are just some of the fundamental common sense ways that we can create those opportunities for the next generation. But somebody once said common sense isn't common anymore, right?
Well, that's really great to hear. All of us at Gen Z GOP have been loving to hear and learn from you all tonight. As we said, we are the next generation of Republican Party leadership, and being able to hear from your insights tonight helps us be more equipped to do that. So we're going to take one last final question, and that kind of relates us back to COVID-19. And it's about getting the public back to work. And so what efforts are being made to ensure that these permanent job losses are minimized in the COVID-19 pandemic, especially on a local level?
Well, in Oklahoma City, we obviously have benefited from federal programs, and we also, as I said earlier, received CARES Act dollars that we've turned into a small business continuity program that's put $25–30 million out onto the streets supporting small businesses. Our unemployment right now is 4.8%, which is higher than it was a year ago, but is below 5, which is generally considered by many economists to be full employment. So we feel pretty good about the progress we're making, and I think we just got to continue to support it as best we can, whether it's kind of artificially through things like the Small Business Continuity Program, and whether it's also through masking. I mean, since the moment we adopted that policy, we've always emphasized this is how you keep businesses open. This is how you allow people to do things safely is by wearing masks. So I think as long as that lasts, which may be probably several more months, that's part of reopening the economy. I've always, among the many reasons I've not enjoyed the philosophy of anti-masking is the idea that it's somehow a hindrance on the economy. It's the best thing going for the economy. It's one of the things that holds transmissions down while people are engaging in economic activity. So other than that, I mean, we'll just try to muddle through and get these numbers down and get vaccinations up. And I really am very bullish on the latter part of 2021 and 2022, not just here in Oklahoma City, but all around the country, I think we're going to have an explosion of economic activity. Some have compared it to, what happened in America in the 1920s after the Spanish flu, and we'll see if that holds true. But I think we've got a great opportunity here to really let loose. I look forward to traveling again. I haven't been on a plane in almost a year. I can hardly believe it. So all of that will add up, and I think economic activity will boom, hopefully by the fall.
Well, that's great to hear. Mayor Lincoln, any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, no, I'll just echo some of those comments from Mayor Holt, and here in Stockton, we've been fortunate not to have to lay off any of our city personnel. We went through a bankruptcy 10 years ago, almost a decade ago, and coming out of that bankruptcy, we really solidified our financial position with a long range financial plan. And so our majority of our revenue locally is based off of sales tax. And so we actually had a surplus of little over $13 million. We were able to focus, put a good portion of that towards the debt, but also reinvest that in infrastructure and some capital projects that we were wanting to get done. But right now, that's more of a sustainability model. So we have to, through this pandemic, we have to continue to support our small businesses and do everything that we can within reason through different programs and funding initiatives and partnering at different levels to make sure that they get the support that they need, because, quite frankly, they're the ones that are suffering the most. And so that's a huge priority of ours. But also, again, I agree with Mayor Holt that, towards the end of 2021 and into 2022, there's going to be an explosion. Where Stockton is located too, we've had a lot of job creation here with e-commerce and, logistics and things like that, because everybody's going online, right? I mean, this home deliveries and things like that. And so we've seen growth, and there's future growth in the pipeline there. So we're very optimistic about economic development here, and we're trying to be as intentional and as strategic as possible, to make sure that we provide not only jobs in our community, but livable wage jobs, within our community as well for our constituents.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughtful answers. I'm just going to bring Caitlin and Adrian on just to close this out with us and give us just one last thought. So let's welcome them back. Well, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. It's been an honor to host you here at Gen Z GOP, and we look forward to our continued partnership and looking at everything that you guys have been doing. We really, really enjoy having you here tonight, and we really appreciated you taking some time out of your really busy schedules. And so with that, I'll pass it off to Caitlin and Adrian for their final thoughts.
Adrian, go ahead.
So just to kind of reiterate what I said earlier, I just want to thank you both for joining us tonight and for giving us common sense answers and for being the leadership that the GOP needs right now. And your points that you made were very, very good. And I very much enjoyed listening to your opinions and how you've handled this pandemic. And just thank you both for being here.
Final note here, if you are interested in following either of the mayors on social media, feel free to go to Twitter and you can follow them at David F. Holt for Mayor Holt and at Kevin J. Lincoln for Mayor Lincoln. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming tonight. We hope that we can work with you again soon in the near future. And for everyone else, have a great night. Be safe. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you, Elle, Adrian, Caitlin. Thank you, Ashton, for the original invite, and appreciate you all.
Yes, shout out to Ashton for coordinating a lot of this. He's been a huge help in Gen Z GOP, and we're very lucky to have him. And we will see you guys all next Wednesday for a town hall with Mayor Suarez of Miami on tech. See you guys next week.
Thank you, Gen Z.